Hello and welcome to this video on creating load files in Intella. Typically, load files are used for importing data into databases of review platforms such as Relativity and Summation. You may be required to provide data which has been processed in Intella to a client or third party in a load file format. This video will show you how to prepare a dataset ready for export to a load file and actually creating a load file. Note that this video is designed to show you how a load file can be created using Intella. Because there are numerous settings that can be applied to a load file, some settings will not be shown. For that reason, this video should be used as a guide only, and you should refer to the user manual and other settings and information on this topic. Also note that building the correct load file for your client relies on good communication between you and your client. Discussion and agreement with your client on which fields and settings should be used for the load file should be resolved before any load files are created. Before the main load file is created, it is vital to provide your client with some test load files which contain a variety of different file types. Test load files help to catch any potential issues early on in the piece and can save you a lot of time and cost downstream. In Intella, a load file export is a bit different from exporting files in PDF, native or PST formats. This is because load files have a specific format which can contain a number of different components. These components are native files, rendered images or PDF files, extracted text, and control or the loading file. These components, including the individual settings, need to be taken into consideration when building a load file. The items in a load file are individualized. For example, if I have an email and that email has 2 Word document attachments, I will have 3 entries for that email in the load file. One for the email itself and one each for the 2 attachments. After loading the load file into the review platform, I would expect to see the email and 2 attachments as 3 separate line entries. This is where load files differentiate from other exports. Because all items in a load file need to be individual, care must be taken when selecting and tagging the documents for export to ensure that all attachments to emails are also selected as separate items. If an email is selected and tagged without its attachments, the native file which I mentioned earlier will have its attachments intact. However, only the email will be shown in the review platform once the load file has been loaded. Missing files or attachments would be problematic for any discovery and would probably require rework, which could become a costly exercise. Before a load file can be created, the items for the load file need to be located and tagged ready for export. Note that the list of steps shown for getting your dataset ready for export is a guide only. It is designed so that you can get an idea of what may be involved during this process. Your case and dataset will be different from mine and may require different steps to ensure all required data is in the dataset ready for export. We will start this demonstration at the point where you have completed your filtering process, such as keyword searches and date range filters, and you have your respondent items all tagged up and ready to go. This also presumes that the dataset was ready to be searched and all other required processing such as OCR and encrypted items have been completed. Open the tag of respondent items. The first thing we need to do is reduce the dataset by deduplicating the items. It is important to make sure that the items are deduplicated at their top level. For example, if I have 2 emails which are different but they both have the exact same attachment, typically both the emails and their attachment should be included in the dataset and nothing should be deduplicated or left out. On the other hand, if I have 2 or more top-level emails or items which are identical, then these items can be deduplicated. To identify all the top-level parents of your filtered results, select all of the items in the details table, right-click on the items and select Show Top Level Parents. Tag these items as top level parents. Clear the workspace, then run a search on the top level parent tag. Click on the deduplicate button to deduplicate the items. Tag these items as top level parents - deduplicated. It is important to make sure that the deduplicate button is turned off once you have tagged these items. If the deduplicate button is inadvertently left on, it may remove child items in the following steps. This is something that we really want to avoid as it can cause expensive rework. Now that we have our top level parent items deduplicated, we need to bring back the family for those items. Clear the workspace, then run a search on the deduplicated top level parent tag. Right click and select Show Children. Make sure that the All Descendants option is selected. Tag these items as children of top level parents. We now have all our respondent data deduplicated and the family items returned. However, it is likely that we also have some extra items in this data set that we don't want. These items are called embedded items. They are in the data set because of the way Intella indexes and unpacks the source data during the indexing process. A good example of embedded items can be seen with PDF files. Some PDF files are made up of hundreds of small pictures embedded in the document. When Intella indexes the PDF, it unpacks these small pictures and adds them to the case as separate items. When we ran the Show Children process to return the family items, we inadvertently returned all of these embedded items and now they are in our dataset. Note that there is a setting to turn off indexing of content embedded in documents during the indexing wizard. If this setting was selected, you will see any embedded items. We now need to clean these embedded items out of our dataset before we produce the load file. It is okay to remove these embedded items because in this example, we are still going to produce the original PDF document. If we don't remove these embedded items, then the load file will contain the PDF file plus every embedded image. This becomes problematic for the reviewer during the review process because the review platform becomes cluttered with embedded items when the reviewer only needs to see a single PDF. Leaving the embedded items in the dataset also uses more disk space, adds unnecessary time to the creation of the load file, and extends the time to load the load file into the review platform. To remove the embedded items, clear the workspace, then run a search on the Children of Top Level Parent tag. Go to the Features facet, click on the Embedded category, then run an exclude search. After clicking on the cluster, tag the remaining child items as Children of Top Level Parents clean. Once the child items have been cleaned and tagged, clear the workspace, then run a search on the Children of Top Level Parents clean tag. Also run a search on the deduplicated top level parents tag. Combine all items and add these items to a new tag named Items for Load File. This is the basis of our export. However, we need to make sure that our dataset does not include any irrelevant items such as container files. Container files such as PST files, zip files, etc. are basically folders which contain other files. Since we have already indexed and extracted the child items for these container files, we don't need them anymore and they can be removed from our dataset. Clear the workspace, then run a search on the Items for Load File tag and go to the Type facet. Click on the containers under Type and check whether there are any files from our export set present in any containers. If so, run an exclude search on the containers facet. The remaining items will be your clean dataset ready for export. Tag these items as load file export. Before we move on, I want to point out that the process I've just completed is for demonstration only. There could be other requirements for your case or dataset which you may need to consider when preparing your load file dataset. Now that we have our dataset ready for export, we can go ahead and export the data into a load file. In this demonstration, I'll create a relativity load file with native documents, extracted text, and rendered TIFF images. A lot of default settings will be used for this demonstration. However, we strongly advise you to check the discovery rules for your country and jurisdiction and to build your load file based on those rules. Clear the workspace, then run a search on the Load File Export tag. Select all of the items by clicking on one item in the Details table, then press the Ctrl and A keys together. Right-click in the Details table and click on Export Highlighted Results. This will start the export wizard. Select Load File in the Export Type window and path to where you want to save the load file. You can also create or add your items to an export set on this page. An export set retains the load file items including export IDs or chosen doc IDs in Intella. This is useful for cross-referencing items in a load file with the items in Intella. In the file naming and numbering window, configure the control number or doc ID as it is sometimes referred to. You should have already discussed and agreed what this should be with your client. Examples of the file names are shown on the right to help you obtain the correct format. Next, set the starting number and the page rollover. Finally, set the file grouping option which defines how export files are grouped into folders. In this case, I have matched it to suit my file name convention of prefix, folder and page. I have also entered the prefix of ABC. The Load File Options window contains a lot of settings. Some of these settings will be disabled depending on which load file format is selected. Again, it is important to discuss these and all other settings with your client. However, in this example, I'll use some of the common settings for this load file. I will select Relativity as the format. The file name will be ABC001. I want to include native files. This is useful if a document can't be rendered, as a native file can be opened in its own application. For example, it is common practice not to render spreadsheets as they do not render very well. However, if native files are exported, then these spreadsheets can be reviewed in their native application. I will select Include Image Files. There are several options available, however, in this case I'll select TIFF format at 300 dpi and Group 4 fax encoding, which produce black and white images. If the review system has issues displaying the produced image files, the option for Use TIFF Little Endian format can be toggled on and off to produce TIFF files in Little Endian or Big Endian byte order respectively. Some review systems may not be able to read one of these formats and therefore the other format should be used. This is where providing a test load file to your client can identify these types of issues. I'll include extracted text. Extracted text can be configured to include the contents and other metadata. Select Embed the extracted text directly into the load file if you need to embed the text directly into the control file such as the DII, DAT or CSV file. To do this, a custom field type named extracted text needs to be created. We will look at this option on the next screen. You can exclude a specific tag from being exported by selecting this checkbox. This is useful if you have tagged all of the privileged items in the case and don't want these items exported. You can also set up a placeholder for this option. Finally, the date and time format to be used is configurable. It is best to ensure that the review system can support the date format and separators which will be used. The Load File Field Chooser window allows you to add or remove fields or columns in the load file. This dialog is the epicenter of the load file creation process in Intella. It also allows you to address two different types of fields for the load file. The first is any of Intella's native metadata fields such as sent and received dates for an email. But more importantly, the second is critical load file fields that, although Intella cannot currently display them, they can be generated as part of this export in order to comply with essential load file standards. Such fields include control numbers for doc ID, parent ID, attachment ID, etc. Note that different clients may use different field names for the same data. For example, one client may want you to provide the source path, whereas another client may want location path. The field information which is exported will be the same for these two field names. It is actually the responsibility of the load file author and not the recipient to ensure that clients receive load files with the field names they expect. Again, this boils down to good communication with the client and your ability to ask specific questions during these discussions. Section 24 of the Intella User Manual provides a lot of information on load file settings. It also has some load file engagement checklists which are useful when discussing load file settings and fields with your client. We recommend that you use these checklists to reduce the risk of implementing the wrong settings. On the last screen, I mentioned that you can embed the extracted text directly into the load file. To do this, you'll need to add a custom field on this window. Select the Add Custom Field button and type the name and label for the field. Under the Type drop-down, select Extracted Text, then click OK. You can also create custom fields for any piece of metadata produced by Intella in this way. As mentioned, select the Add Custom Field button and type the name and label for the field. Under the Type drop-down, select Intella_column. This will show all of the metadata fields processed by Intella in the Intella column drop-down. Select the desired metadata field from the list and click on OK. Note that when creating custom fields for summation load files, you must add a capital C and a space before the field name and the label field. This tells the summation system that this is a custom field. The PDF or image rendering options allow you to customize what is rendered and how it is rendered. Rendering is the process of converting files to PDF or image format. This is useful for when documents require annotations such as stamps and redactions before being produced. In this section, you can skip certain file types from being rendered. I mentioned earlier that spreadsheets are often skipped because they do not render very well. This is where you can add them. The include item metadata settings are split into two sections, emails and files. Here you can add various types of metadata for each item. Generally for load files, the preferred output would be to have the rendered image look as close to the original document as possible. To achieve this, most of the metadata fields are turned off. This is not an issue because the specified metadata is still included in the load file. The Configure button for Main Properties above Body allows the user to add, remove, or order specific metadata for email and calendar items. This is useful if you want to have a custom format for rendered emails. The headers and footers settings allow the user to add document numbering and other data to be shown on the page. This can be shown in any corner of the page, and more than one piece of information can be shown on each document. It is important to set the redacted item settings for an export if redactions have been made to documents. This allows the user to export a flattened PDF version of the document which contains the redactions. These settings also allow the user to suppress export of native files and extracted text for redacted items. Note that there are a few things to be aware of when using redactions. 1. Highlighted areas may not exactly cover the text when the PDF is generated. This is dependent on the font characteristics of the original document. 2. Not all occasions of the word that was searched may have been found. For instance, misspelled words, hyphenated words, and text within graphics may still be viewable. 3. Redaction settings on one item do not get associated to duplicates of that item. The Reports and Ordering window allows the user to save and export report in various formats and to select ordering in which the items are exported. The last window allows the user to start the load file creation process. Before clicking on the Start Export button, we recommend that you check the Save as Export Template option so that you can use these settings again. Once the export process has completed, you should run some QA checks to make sure that everything has worked as expected. This is not an exhaustive list, however, here are some items to check. 1. Note the number of items that are in the tag ready for export in Intella. Open the .dat load file in a text editor and make sure that the number of items or rows matches this number. Remember not to count the top header row. 2. If native files have been exported, you can also check that the native folder has the same number of items to what was exported from Intella. Note that this number may not be the same if redactions have been made and native files have not been exported for redacted items, or if certain native file types were excluded in the export, such as spreadsheets. 3. Open some of the rendered images and make sure that these have been produced correctly. Remember that items such as spreadsheets should have been skipped and a placeholder should be in its place if these options were selected. 4. If you have exported redacted files, make sure that the rendered images have redactions intact and there are no native files or extracted text for these items. 5. It is also recommended to import your completed load file into a new Intella case as part of your testing. This will help to table any issues with the load file before it is provided to the client. Check if there are any other QA checks specific to your organization that must be conducted. Once all of the QA checks have been completed, your load file should be ready to provide to your client. There are some final points that are worth noting. We recommend reading the section on load files in the user manual. This contains a lot of critical information for building load files. Every load file is different. You should communicate well with your client and agree on the settings and parameters for the load file. Once agreed, build some test load files based on those specifications and ask the client to test them in their system. Relative paths are used with load files, and it is important that these paths or structures are maintained. A relative path is a path which starts from some given working directory. For example, the location of the DAT file post-export is relative to the images, natives, and text folders. When I start to load the DAT file, the system looks for these folders in a relative path to the DAT file and loads the data within these folders. If I move the DAT file to some other directory, then the loading would not work, as the folders for images, natives, and text would not be available. Note that in some cases, load file tweaks may be required by the recipient, as only that person has access to the environment where they are being loaded. In some cases, that's what ultimately matters in getting the load file to work. We suggest that you seek assistance if you have little knowledge of load files or have not created a load file before. Creating a load file that has the wrong data or missing data can generate a substantial amount of rework to fix the issue. We have seen this happen on several occasions, and it usually boils down to the user being inexperienced. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. This video, along with other training videos, can be viewed at the link shown below.